We continue following breaking news from Brazil, an eerily familiar scene for Americans. Supporters of former President Bolsonaro storming the National Congress, refusing to accept his defeat in the most recent election. The crowd also taking over the Supreme Court and government offices, climbing onto roofs and breaking windows. Brazilian President Lula da Silva, inaugurated only a week ago, condemns the attack and is now on his way to the Capitol. The White House says President Biden has been briefed on the situation in Brazil. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken signaled his support for Lula on Twitter, writing, quote, "Using violence to attack democratic institutions is always unacceptable." Joining me to discuss, Democratic Congresswoman Sara Jacobs of California. She's the House Democratic Caucus Leadership Representative and a member of the Steering and Policy Committee. Thank you, Congresswoman, for joining me. I first just want to get your reaction to the violent invasion of Brazil's Congress. Do you think that what happened on January 6th here in the United States a couple of years ago could have inspired what we're seeing today in Brazil?
Absolutely. It is deeply troubling what we're seeing in Brazil today. And even more troubling is how much it is reminiscent of what we saw on January 6th 2 years ago. And we know that there are ties to the far-right groups in multiple countries, and that far-right groups in countries around the world are modeling themselves after what they've seen in the United States.
Now, you were actually inside the House chamber during the January 6th attack. Reflecting on that and the week that we just watched in the chamber, I mean, what has it been like watching election deniers now take control of the GOP this past week?
I think it's really sad that the people who held up the speaker vote are really the who's who of people who were encouraging and inciting the violence on January 6th and spreading the big lie. And I think it is really concerning that Kevin McCarthy has mortgaged his leadership of the House to those same far-right extremists. It concerns me about what it means for the next 2 years, about what it means for the basic functioning of our government, passing a debt limit, passing a budget. And it's concerning because you have, I worked at the State Department before, and I worked on political violence issues around the world, actually. And what you see is the first time you see political violence, it's a big violent attack like what we saw on January 6th and like what we're seeing in Brazil today. But actually, future attempts tend to be more insidious and using the institutions and mechanisms of power themselves to overturn the will of the people. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the United States right now.
Well, and as you alluded to, I mean, you're not new to this. Before serving in Congress, you monitored extremism overseas for the State Department. And so how concerned are you about political violence or another coup attempt here in the United States?
I'm very concerned. I'm concerned because we're already seeing the kind of rhetoric that you would see leading up to something like this, questioning integrity of our institutions. I'm concerned because we have not yet done all of the accountability work that we need to do to make sure we're not only holding accountable the foot soldiers, but actually the people who incited and encouraged and planned and orchestrated this attack. And I'm concerned because what we're seeing is the very same thing we see in other countries. The far-right election deniers are starting to use the institutions themselves, and that becomes harder and harder to stand up against because ostensibly it looks like they're following the rules. And so I think we need to be very vigilant, and we need to make sure that not only are we holding people accountable, but we're also rebuilding and investing in our institutions so that they'll be more resilient to this kind of thing.
Congresswoman Sara Jacobs, thank you.